Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the course based on the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa, entitled The Buddhist Path of Awakening. And we are working our way through these 3 volumes. These are a digest, these volumes of talks given by Trungpa Rinpoche over the years, but over a period of about 15 years, longer period, but missed a few years. And each year he would take a group of students away to a retreat for about 3 months. And during that time, they would practice and study together, and he would lecture. And each retreat was divided into 3 periods: Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Foundational teachings, the great teachings of the middle way, and then the Vajrayana or Tantrayana adamantine teachings. These teachings have been digested by Judy Leaf into these 3 volumes. And we are on the 2nd volume now, dealing with, I think we're at chapter 26. This material is increasingly profound, and tonight is no exception. And there's a lot tonight. So we'll just start. Let's bow in first, everybody. Traditional. Great. Okay. These 2 chapters, one very short and the other longer, are rather complex. The material is straightforward enough, but it is presented in parts, and the organization of those parts is complicated. Basically, all the teachings of the Mahayana are driven by 2 principles, which can be discussed or not, but Rinpoche discussed them, called principle of profundity and that of vastness. Profundity has to do primarily with the teachings of Shunyata as they are presented to us in a variety of circumstances, but in the Prajna Paramita teachings, and especially in the teachings of Maryamaka, that the Maryamaka school of Mahayana Buddhist philosophy that was founded by the great teacher Nagarjuna, or Nagarjuna, however we like to pronounce that, who lived roughly 150 to 250 BC, AD. And he, the school that he developed, the Maryamaka school, explained really the Prajna Paramita teachings, and also gave thinking that you might say illuminated them, logical thinking. And this is what is meant when you talk about these 2 aspects of the Mahayana, the profundity and the vastness. This is the profundity. The teachings of Shunyata as they are presented in the Prajna Paramita sutras, and also in the Madhyamaka school. And they have to do, these teachings, primarily with Shunyata, which is the teaching of emptiness. And emptiness means the teaching that I and other do not exist. They are fictions, and they are fictions which lead us astray in our lives, involve us in error, suffering, samsara, to sum it up, The belief in I and other is a constant sorrow for all of us, because it involves a continual battle between the two poles, a search for happiness, for security, for ease, which can't be found in this tension between the two poles of I and other. Because the fact of the matter is that they are fictions. They only exist in the story of a relationship between them. In fact, all the stories, these tensions, these fraught unhappinesses, are stories about the tensions between I and other. And when the stories stop, I and other are gone, because they only live as objects or heroes or heroines in those stories. And because we know this in our heart of hearts, and we don't want I to cease to exist, we cherish this I. We keep these stories going, these stories which are fraught with conflict, with tension, with unhappiness, with struggle, with strife, with the three poisons of aggression, passion, and ignorance. Meaning that as long as we believe in a self, as long as we are caught in these stories, there are three modalities between these two poles of I and other. They can get closer together, that's passion. If we think that the other is going to, we want to pull it towards us because it's going to keep the story going and make it a happy one, that's passion. If we think that the other is inimical, dangerous, threatening to the existence of I and the story, we push it away, that's aggression. But that's really another way of keeping the story going. And the third way is that if we think that the other is neutral, indifferent, well, then we stay the same distance. And that's the third poison, which is stupidity, indifference, dullness. And these complicate these stories when these three basic polarities, when we add stories to them, all kinds of stories, like I'm mad at that person because they insulted me. I feel attracted to this person, but I'm also angry with them because they've got something that I want. That's envy. And so it goes, and we complicate these emotions with stories, and they proliferate into what are called the 5 or the 6 kleshas, depending on which system you're looking at, of pride, envy, jealousy, pride, jealousy, passion, stupidity, sloth, feeling of poverty, hunger, and finally hatred and fear. These are the 6 realms that I just went through. So these two teachings of profundity and vastness, profundity especially, leads us into a very, very different world, a very different way of being. It's the world in which we begin to discover and realize that I and other are just fictions, myths, or as Trungpa Rinpoche once bellowed during a seminar that I was at, ego is a lie, which is identifying it as being really, really pernicious, dangerous, terrible, evil. So these teachings are about, the Mahayana teachings on the aspect of profundity are about stepping into a very different world. The same world, and yet seen utterly differently. Seen as it really is, which is empty of I and other. That's the world of shunyata. That's why it's called emptiness. Empty, it's void. Shunya means void. Void of what? Void of I and other. They are fictions. They are lies. And we begin to overcome them. The other side of these two aspects of vastness and profundity is vastness. And this has more to do with the teachings, according to Rinpoche, he mentions briefly, of the Yogacara school. And the Yogacara school was founded by a man named Asanga, who lived roughly about 350 to 450 AD. He was after Nagarjuna. And he had a brother named Vasubandhu. And Vasubandhu was a great Hinayana practitioner and teacher. And the Sangha conscripted him into the Yogacara school, this Mahayana school, and Vasubandhu became a great Yogacharan. There's a lot more we could study that. It's really wonderful stuff. The Yogacharan school is sort of in a token way. It's much more than this, but it really represents the tradition of vastness. And what vastness is all about is compassion, how to be in the world in a sane way that is open-hearted, loving, appreciative, and engaged. Compassion is the hallmark of this vastness. And it has four main aspects, this vastness. The first is called great compassion, Maha Karuna in Sanskrit. Maha means great, Karuna is the worst Sanskrit word for compassion. In Tibetan, it's Nyingje Chenpo. Chenpo means great, and Nyingje means noble heart, literally, which is the word for compassion. And it's really what it amounts to. This is having a terrifically open heart that is free, that is able to participate, that is able to feel, that is without agenda. It is open and sensitive and intelligent. It's the freedom of emptiness. It's the utter genuineness that is found in the absence of I and other. That this reality is genuine, true, trustworthy, real, that we can trust it and live in it, and that it has great heart. And in this Maha Karuna, this great compassion, there is no attempt to avoid or manipulate anything according to the schemes of I, of ego. Instead, there are the other three aspects of this vastness. One is luminosity. That is, that having stepped into this world of emptiness and having opened one's heart and mind, that this world is seen as being gorgeously vivid. We don't see it when we're engaged in the I and other endeavors because we're too absorbed in suffering, anxiety, fear, irritation, hatred, all of these emotions. And we're sort of made blind to the extraordinary vividness and beauty of this world. And so the term, as he identifies it in this chapter, Urselwa. Ursel literally means, Urselwa, wa is a nominative, it turns it into a noun, but Ursel is an adjective. Means light, and sel means luminous. And what it's saying is that when one lives in the world of emptiness, of absence of I and other, these mistakes, then the phenomenal world arises, all of the phenomenal world, including your own mind, as luminous light. And it's very beautiful and very vivid. This is the second quality of great compassion. The third quality is skillful means. He identifies as tapla kepa. It's usually just called tapla in Tibetan, upaya in Sanskrit. And what it means is that living in the real world, instead of this fictional world of I and other with all of its games and dramas and false tracks, that when we live in the real world, we can appreciate this world for what it really is and respond appropriately to it. Skillfully. Skillfully how? Skillfully, what that means is that we're responding to things as they truly are. instead of through the veils of our preconceptions, our hatreds, our loves, our habitual distortions. So that's the third quality of Maha Karuna. And the fourth quality is peace. In Tibetan, it's Shiva. I forgot what it is in Sanskrit. And what this refers to is that when we dwell in this space momentarily for long periods of time, whatever we're capable of, it's spacious because there is no back and forth between these imaginary poles of I and other. And it's tremendously spacious. And in that space is tremendous peace, the absence of the struggle to make oneself happy, to avoid pain, the pain of. Now, so this vastness is the subject of this chapter 26, applying emptiness to everyday life. The idea is that the paramitas are expressions of emptiness. If we begin to live in this world of emptiness, we express ourselves and the world itself in new ways, in ways which are described by the paramitas. And here, for whatever reason, they are organized into three categories, these what are called the three supreme disciplines. Now, in the Hinayana teachings, we had these same disciplines at a lower level. They are, I'm sorry, I just got a comment, we're hearing some scratchy noise. That's my papers. I'll try and minimize that. These three disciplines are, these three, you might say, categories are Shila, which is discipline, Samadhi, which is meditative absorption, and Prajna, which is non-dual wisdom, intelligence. And then he gives us the Tibetan as well, which I'm not going to bother you with. It's getting a little much, all these different translations. And Shila these are ways of organizing the paramitas. Shila encompasses the first three paramitas are grouped under the heading of Shila, of discipline, and they are generosity, Shila, which is morality or discipline, and patience. The fourth paramita we'll come back to, that's virya, energy, joy. The fifth paramita is meditation, dhyana in Sanskrit, samten in Tibetan. And this is the second of these characteristics. It's Shila, Samadhi. Samadhi is another name for meditation. And that's where the fifth paramita lives. And then finally, the third category is Prajna. And that's where the sixth paramita lives, Prajna. The fourth paramita, virya, energy, also called joy, permeates all the paramitas. But then you could say that of a lot of them. Prajna certainly does too. So that's the basic organization of that. And the idea is simply that because you have great compassion, you have discovered it because the bodhisattva has entered the bodhisattva path and has discovered emptiness, which is freedom from belief in self, and is the beginning of stepping into this openness of compassion. And because of this, he can practice the supreme discipline of these three paramitas: generosity, which we're going to come to as the second chapter in more depth; discipline, which means basically staying sane, the discipline of staying present, staying here now. And patience, which is more of the same, that having dwelling in emptiness, in shunyata, in the absence of I and other, one has no urge to keep things safe, to make them better, to constantly improve. And instead, one can dwell right here in this space and act appropriately, doing what is necessary. He says, having let go of self-possessiveness, then morality, discipline, shila, sultram in Tibetan, is produced by the daily practice that one has throughout the day of letting go of I and other and of not giving in to the kleshas, but of dwelling in this openness of awareness, of meditative awareness, coming back. That means, above all, that you're kind to yourself too. You're not trying to make yourself some kind of non-parais. You're not making yourself some superior being. Actually, we're just seeing who we are, what's going on in the moment, with acceptance, with kindness for ourselves. And this produces these three paramitas of generosity, because we can afford to be generous, we're right here in the moment, of discipline, and the discipline is acting appropriately here and now, and patience. We don't have this agenda. We can be here with whatever needs our attention, our care. The second of these three disciplines, these are called the superior disciplines. You see, these were presented at the Hinayana level, but now they're being up-leveled. They're being up-leveled into egolessness, into shunyata. So the second samadhi is the Paramita of meditation. He says, you work with peace and skillful means so everything functions harmoniously. You're just aware in the present moment and doing what is appropriate. With good control over your mind, you are able to work properly with the world and your state of being. And the third of these three disciplines is Prajna. And here he says, you use luminosity, that's the luminous quality of this world, and great compassion, that means openness and appreciation of this world, to the point where you are able to discriminate dharmas and perform awakened activities. That means you see things as they truly are, instead of through the veil of our prejudices, which are so powerful and omnipresent, those prejudices. They just lie hidden in our alaya, in our unconscious, as it were, waiting to be sparked out so that we act with aggression and hatred and poverty mentality and all those things. He says, learning is important, so you should be literate and a good grammarian. He used to teach elocution. I was married to his sister-in-law for a while. She's passed. And she used to go to these elocution lessons. The rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain. I can't do it. And she used to call them electrocution lessons. But it was part of this idea of culture, of literate, of being a good grammarian. You should know how to speak properly and behave properly. I'm quoting from the chapter. You should communicate a quality of intelligence because you're open, you're here in the present moment. Intelligence doesn't mean that you know sort of the works of Heidegger or, if you're an expert in physics. What it means is that you're seeing this world accurately as it is and responding to it appropriately. And if you apply this Maha Karuna, you finally, with its emphasis on luminosity, on skillful action, on great compassion, then you finally get to know the meaning of peace, because we are freeing ourselves from the incredible suffering of the thoughts that inhabit our minds about me and others. So then we get to, now he begins to drill down, and he's going to go through each of the paramitas, and the first paramita is generosity, dana in Sanskrit, dana paramita, jinpa in Tibetan. This is experienced when one begins to understand emptiness, begins to have experiences of emptiness, shunyata, and begins to shift one's loyalty from these neurotic, unhappy dreams, thoughts that we have, shifting your loyalty to emptiness. And then generosity begins to appear, because it's the part of the entrance into the Mahayana. The entrance into the Mahayana is divided into 10 stages, called the 10 bhumis in Sanskrit. Sa, they're called the 10 sa in Tibetan. And the first bhumi is the bhumi in which we begin to experience and understand generosity, dana, paramita. Each bhumi, each stage, has a paramita that corresponds to it. The first 6 are the most important. 7th gets there too, and the 10th. The first bhumi, the name of that bhumi is great joy. Pra, which is an intensifier, mudita, Sanskrit for joy. Pramudita. And why is it great joy? It's great joy because we begin to come present, come out of our dreams into this present moment, and it's freedom. It's freedom from the suffering, and it's a great beginning to appreciate this world as it arises in the moment, the only world we ever have. This stage is described as a treasury of wealth, because when you begin to become generous, which is what happens as one enters shunyata, you're giving up poverty mentality. Poverty mentality is saying, I'm poor, I have to collect stuff. I have to protect myself from losing stuff. I'm just this poor little thing. And so you begin to develop a mentality of wealth, the treasury of wealth it's called. And this only continues to expand, intensify as you progress along the bodhisattva path. And this has produced all of this, the entrance into the Mahayana path, the understanding of emptiness, the beginning to develop this wealth mentality, is produced by your meditation practice, shamatha vipassana. Your shamatha vipassana practice. Vipassana, especially. You see, shamatha is contained within vipassana. Shamatha is, as I've said so many times, it means the ability to come back from dream into this present moment. Vipassana means having come back, then we begin to be aware of this present moment and to see it in all of its beauty, its vividness, its ursel, its luminosity. That term, luminosity, becomes more and more important as you go further and further on the path into Tantra, where it becomes very important. And it's in union with emptiness. The two go together. They are a pair, two aspects, two sides of the same coin, you might say. Shunyata and Brahmasvara, or Ursel in Tibetan, Tongyi in Tibetan is Shunyata, and Ursel. So you practice shamatha vipassana, and what you're doing is you're coming more and more and more into this present moment. You're beginning to shift your loyalty from these anxious dreams of ambition, of thought, of I and other, of wishing things were otherwise, of being critical, it's so mean. And one's shifting one's loyalty from that to this appreciation and awareness of the world as it rises now, the only real world we ever have. And so what we begin to understand, as he puts it in the text, is the relationship with absolute and relative awakened mind. Absolute mind is what I've been describing as shunyata. The fact that the things that we think exist, I and other, are just fictions. That everything is a constantly changing presentation. Never stops. And relative bodhicitta is that having begun to understand that, you want to be of service. You want to express your appreciation, your love, your affection, your friendship. And you do that by being kind, and that's the relative bodhicitta. So dana, paramita, generosity, is giving, donating, opening yourself up in situations. We've seen it. We've all seen it. When a person is real, opens themselves, in spite of perhaps fear of being criticized, rejected, but is open in the situation and being true to who they are, it's a great gift. That is one of the ways, maybe one of the most profound ways, of expressing dana, paramita, generosity. He says, it's the strength to work with others, to relate with their energy as well as your own. It's free, dana, from desiring for oneself. In Tibetan, it means open-handedness, letting go, giving away. You're removing stinginess and possessiveness. He says it takes some time to give in to generosity. And that giving in happens gradually. So don't be hard on yourself if you find yourself being stingy. It takes time. But once we begin to get the bug, once we begin to see it, it grows. He says, and when you give, you feel richer. Jinpa opens up the journey toward wakefulness because we are letting go of our possessiveness. It can be a shock when we actually do it, because our instincts for a long time have been to be self-protective, self-aggrandizing, not generous. He says non-attachment is the nature of generosity. The intelligence and vision that everything is not dependent on what you want. So the first message you give yourself should never be, I want. There should be other considerations, the rest of the world. He says, in most cases, I should come last. We are willing to be the period at the end of the sentence, he says. This might hurt, because from childhood, we've been accustomed to putting ourselves first. But at the same time, you might feel tremendous relief of giving up I, that you don't have to bring I along. A sore thumb, always embarrassing, painful. There is tremendous freedom to move around without you being there. It feels very good, he says. And we're overcoming poverty mentality. Poverty mentality says, I'm just this poor little person. I've got to protect myself. I got to bring a lot of stuff to me. Giving up poverty mentality means you're willing to part with things you regard as precious. You're learning how to part with whatever you have, he says. Doesn't matter if you're poor or rich. With poverty mentality, you don't want to part with anything, including your aggression or your passions. You want to hold them close. He says you think, whatever you have, just keep it. I might need it later on. And you squirrel it away. Talks about your talents, your failings, your strategies, all these things all have to be given up, given away. So generosity is based on, and then he lists a number of things. You're giving up miserly and stinginess. You're developing a mentality of plentifulness and opulence, that you don't want to possess anything for yourself. You don't need anything from anywhere. You can stick with your own resources. I mean, we can all feel this, can't we? Giving up miserly and stinginess, developing a mentality of plentifulness. What do you have to offer? Everything. You could share it and give it away. It says, once you're awake, it means once you begin to come back into this world of vipassana, or of shunyata if you want, you're no longer concerned with yourself alone. You would rather contribute something to others. You should be helping others with the difficulties they experience on the path. He says, generosity is considered to be unshakable. It means your mind can't be changed. You are exchanging yourself for others. It means putting them first, which is one of the first and best attributes of the Bodhisattva path. Generosity is based on you feeling so rich that you have enough to give away. And that richness comes from the sanity of entering into shunyata. Without that, we're poverty-stricken. As long as we live in the world of I and other, we are constantly beleaguered, constantly threatened, constantly diminished. But entering into the world of shunyata, of emptiness, the absence of I and other, that's where richness lives. And then he says, but it doesn't mean losing everything and becoming a slave of others. You're not giving away your shareholdings, but your profits. I don't know where that one comes from. I don't think he had much in the experience with investments. And there are 3 levels of generosity. giving material things, food, housing, clothing, and you give good stuff, good clothes, not rags, and you express your richness, giving people what they actually need, not what they say they need necessarily, because people are neurotic, you know. I've been listening to that song, Santa Baby. She asked him to decorate her tree for her with stuff from Tiffany, Eartha Kitt. And she asked him to bring her a convertible baby blue, and she wants a platinum mine. So you give people what they actually need in good taste, not junk. Says the magic of generosity is that even though you don't have a lot of money, a lot of wealth, you do not proclaim your poverty, and you can inspire others by your example of being generous. You can inspire them to build richness in themselves, to be generous, to be as confident and lacking in poverty mentality as you. You can help them to see that they too could relate with generosity. This is all under the generosity of material things. Then there's the gift of fearlessness, which is very related. It's giving up regarding yourself or others as a welfare case so that you can give to others. You have the strength, the wealth. You're not afraid for your life. And then he says this, and I saw him do this. He says, by making people work, they begin to realize that these people who you're making work, have the resources to maintain themselves with dignity, feeling good about themselves, not constantly feeling themselves beggars. They could develop their own capital. And I'll tell you, in the early 70s, when we all showed up here in Colorado, we're all hippies, I mean, more or less. Some of us were more hippies than others. I was on the outer, sort of older edge of that spectrum. And so although, I wore my hair in a ponytail and had a beard, I wasn't nearly as much of a hippie, I was 25, as the 17 and 18-year-olds who were showing up barefoot in the winter. I remember people showing up barefoot in the winter, the pygmies. And he turned people around. He was amazing. He told them, he got them wearing suits. He got them having jobs. He got them starting businesses. I remember there was this meeting we had where there was a bunch of hippies and they wanted to form a craft studio. I hope I haven't told you this one. And we're all sitting around and there's this place that they can rent over on 14th Street above a dry cleaner. It's just a big room, and each person who is participating could have a little bench in there and make their crafts and sell their stuff. And they're talking about this with Rinpoche, and they're saying, but I don't think we can actually afford it. I don't think we can raise the money through our crafts to pay the rent. And he says, you can do it. You can do it. Take the leap, he kept saying. And they would say, but Rinpoche, it's so expensive. And he said, you can do it. Take the leap. And then finally, they're just so resistant. He says, okay, don't do it. I'll love you anyhow. And they did it. And it was successful. And then it went on from there. And there was the Triple Gem company that Marty Janowitz and others started, where they were selling gems, and they were traveling all around the United States selling gems. This was a company, they were buying and selling gemstones. And there was a guy who came in and he started an oil company with Rinpoche. And then just people showing up in suits, people who had been walking around barefoot, going out and buying a suit and coming to events in suits. And we had a ball that took place every year, and people had to learn how to waltz and come in tuxedos, or at least in a suit for the men, and women in gowns. So these people who had been barefoot hippies, here they are. We went out to the Elks Club, and what he's doing, he's making people, give away their fear of and their poverty mentality and come into the world, have kids. He wanted people to get married and have kids. And I'm telling you, he wasn't subtle about it. He got me and Christy to get married. We didn't want to get married. But I'd walk into the room and I'd be sitting there with him, and she'd walk in and he would go, ding dong, ding dong, like that. But he did this with everybody. He wanted people to settle down. There was a seminar that he gave back then. It was at the Wesley Foundation. It was a church out on 28th Street. And it was the seminar on American karma. And I remembered him saying to all of these hippies who were sitting on the floor with their babies and, beards and whatever, saying to them, you're all looking for a way out. It was counterculture, right? Where everybody's doing drugs, looking, Vietnam, anti-Vietnam, rejecting the ways of their parents with 2 cars in every garage and, a chicken in every pot. And they were rejecting that. And he's saying, you're all looking for a way out, but it's not a matter of finding the way out. It's a matter of finding the way in. Never forgot that line. So this gift of fearlessness, no longer afraid, you can afford to be arrogant in the positive sense, teaching others how not to feel tormented and fearful of their own existence. You can help others see their resourcefulness, ability, competence. You can help others discover their basic goodness. Instead of feeling poor, impoverished, and having to protect themselves, that they're rich, they're fundamentally, basically good. And their spiritual practice, you give the gift of fearlessness, of self-confidence, showing them that this can be proclaimed. He says, your fearlessness can comfort their fearfulness. And boy, was he doing that with everybody. Finally, there's the gift of the Dharma. And you could present it, I love this, at a very ordinary, reasonable level, so that it doesn't put people off, he says. It's kind of like you could be a good salesman, you could be sweet and charismatic and seduce people in. Hearing the Dharma properly will ground people, he says. They will begin to trust in themselves as well as the Dharma. And that's a prerequisite for good teaching, that people begin to trust in themselves. And then he says, here it is. First, you need to have good conversations with people, charm them, make a connection, and then finally you might present the Dharma. It's funny. And he says, following the Bodhisattva path, you are practicing these 3 types of generosity at the same time. You can open up people's minds so that their closedness, their wretchedness, and small thinking can be turned into larger vision. That is the idea of the Mahayana altogether. These 3 levels. Then he talks about rehearsing being generous. We ought to try this. You can actually take something valuable. I don't have anything valuable enough right here. And you rehearse giving it to somebody over and over again. You sort of hold out your hand like this. That's what he says in this chapter, right? Everybody's read it, I think. And he says, from a sense of giving, richness arises. You can rehearse being generous, holding a precious object in your hand and extending your arm again and again. But the attitude of this practice is precisely the opposite. You invite all strangers. You don't hold back from strangers. If they do anything strange, that is their problem. But as far as you are concerned, you have to extend yourself as much as you can. Although you may not feel generous, you just do it. And it opens the door in your own mind and the mind of others. When you practice generosity, especially when it's not expected, it can have a very powerful effect on a situation. Mm. He says, you have to be careful about the object of your generosity. You don't want to give to somebody who's going to be harmful, use your generosity in a harmful fashion, but that's just common sense. The more you give, the more you gain. But that should not be your reason for giving. I'm just quoting him. Rather, the more you give, the more you are constantly inspired to give. And the gaining process happens naturally and automatically. I think of that Lojong slogan about taking the blame that I found so powerful in my own experience. And when you take the blame, even when it's somebody else's you think it's really their fault, but you take the blame, that's an enormous act of generosity. And it can really open doors and situations. So this was a lot of material in these 2 chapters and about these 12 pages. Generosity is so gorgeous. It can be such a beautiful practice when it's done powerfully. Beautiful in the sense of opening things up between the people involved. Beautiful in that the giver discovers their wealth rather than their poverty, that they can afford to be generous. So we could have a discussion if you like.
John, this is Tully. Just to break the ice, I will thank you for telling the stories about Trungpa and the pygmies, the hippies, and how he helped them elevate their sense of what they could do in life, as well as giving them probably a sense of greater dignity. And I appreciate the stories because for me, it takes the conceptual notion of skillful means and gives me a concrete example of it. And that was helpful to me. So thank you for that.
You just gave me goosebumps. You did, because I loved these people, They were really wonderful. The Sangha was, it still is, it's wonderful. Sangha, draws us all together. And it was really funny. But he turned everybody around,
Wow.
Not a matter of finding the way out, a matter of finding the way in. People got married, had babies, started businesses, and they weren't going to do that when they first met him.
Yeah, he had it. What were you saying? I forget the exact words, but you were quoting him saying something like, well, when you first see somebody, don't overwhelm them with the Dharma, you polite, you engage them in conversation and so forth. And from obviously, I never met Trungpa, but from a distance of time and space, one of the things I have found amazing was his ability to relate to people in a very different culture, have them be comfortable with him, and then he flipped them around before they knew what was happening. Is my sense of what went on. I mean, in the early days, you were there, so you tell me, but at Tail of the Tiger, it was sort of the hippies could, at least there, I thought, could relate to him. Smoking cigarettes and all his other outrageous behavior. He thought it may relax them, and then he flipped himself around. Well, he flipped them around, and before they knew what was happening, is my sense of what happened. You tell me, but that was my sense of what happened, which was a remarkable accomplishment for a guy who grew up in Tibet and had escaped the communists and hard life there in India, and then Oxford. What a wild life. But what skillful means is my read of it. And in a really unique, unbelievable way. So again, thanks for the stories.
I agree. Thank you. Kurt?
Yeah, I guess on a bit of a follow-up on what Tully was just talking about, in that Sangha at that time, and then relating to this Sangha that we are all present in, is it's helpful for me to look at this idea of generosity, maybe from a generous point of view, of looking at the generosity that we already possess. That I kind of see everybody here in the Sangha as very generous people, that we're doing things in our lives, whether in my case, an artist and teacher, and we've got therapists and lawyers and bookkeepers and whatnot, and these are all acts of service in the world. And most of us are not 18 years old any longer. We found a way in the world, and it seems like that we're all bringing a gift to the world. And for myself, it helps me to cultivate my own generosity by seeing the generosity that I already have and building off of that, opposed to that. I could also look at it from the point of poverty, of the places that I'm not generous, but that doesn't seem to work for me, because that brings me down, opposed to appreciating where I do give and then work off of that. And then when I'm in that space, I see it within everybody else too, and how they are generous. And it's just something that popped up from what Tully was just brought up about your song of the past.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you all.
Tony.
Hi, thanks, John. That was just wonderful again. I just, you make the teaching so clear and so lucid. I was at a recovery meeting beforehand, and Chogyam Trungpa was quoted in the literature there about, it was basically about, we've talked about it, the spiritual shopping. It's about stop shopping and about, deciding on choosing a particular path. And it's just amazing to me how much he relates, and this whole teaching really relates to what we were talking about tonight, which is the 11th step, which is about helping others. It's about prayer and meditation, but it's also about reaching out to the newcomer. It's about helping people. It's about, and what we have, which is fundamentally a part of what you're talking about here, is in order to keep it, you have to be able to give it away, So I'm just really happy that everything that's coming to me from the classes that I'm doing with you is really enhancing my sobriety as well. So thank you, and thank you, Chogyam Trungpa.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. Yeah. That was really, I think that was an example of generosity on Tony's part. I'm sort of, we could have a homework assignment to go do something generous and then report back. What do you think? Yeah. Anybody who wants to, it'd be fun. Go do something generous. And, he makes the point, you don't harm yourself with this generosity, but I just saw him constantly being generous. Remember the three ways of generosity: physical, material things, the gift of fearlessness, and the Dharma. And they all happen within that first paramita of generosity.
I have a question. It just struck me. I thought, oh yes, let's do that. Let's just practice and have an act of generosity and report back, like keep ourselves accountable. And then I imagined various things that I could do. And it occurred to me that I could do something generous towards someone to alleviate some guilt. I could do something generous towards someone to forget about myself, and these types of incentives are like very ego-based. I don't think it takes away from the positive impact of generosity, but I could also see it coming from a selfless place. But the ones I had in mind had to do with making myself feel better somehow.
I think you just have to put a foot forward. You have to take a step. You have to go into action. And then something unexpected might happen.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to take a chance. I call it sometimes putting oneself in harm's way, because you don't really know what's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to work, if it's going to be bad, if it's going to be your ego, if it's going to, come back on you in some way. And then when you don't know that and you do it anyhow, something unexpected
Mm-hmm.
can happen.
Yeah.
So, but there's a little bit, it's like he was saying, to those people who wanted to rent the craft studio, take the leap, he kept saying. Take the leap. You can do it. They say, Rinpoche, this one isn't going to work. And he says, you can do it. And finally, oh, okay, don't do it. I'll love you anyhow.
Reverse
Everybody
psychology.
goes groans like this.
Yeah, no, I understand. So yeah, just do it. Take a leap of faith, essentially. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you. Karen Sue.
So I'd love to tell this story. I worked for Tiffany and Company, and one sales meeting, they gave us this big box with 4 or 6 Tiffany coffee mugs in them. And I put it in my closet, and I lived in New York, and it was in the top of my closet for years. And it wasn't important to me. And my sister really loved things from Tiffany and Company. So I just took the box and I gave it to her and said, here, have these. And she said, oh, thank you so much. That's really very sweet of you. And she put them in this hutch, that was open so you could see them. It was a glass hutch case. And her very young son, she told me this story, her very young son had a friend over, and he took his friend in front of the hutch and said, see those coffee mugs? My aunt gave those to my mother for no reason at all. And I just thought that was an amazing, amazing outcome of this situation where, you know, this gift. And I just, in all of our talks, that just reminded me of that transformation of something so simple and almost seeming meaningless to me. And I just so enjoy remembering that situation. So thanks.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Any other comments?
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, it's beautiful teachings. And one of the things that strikes me about generosity is to be truly generous requires first being fearless. And I had an assignment last year in a course to every day do some kindness. Wasn't necessarily giving a material thing, although I found myself doing that too, but to just sometimes simply smile at a stranger, give a compliment, do a small favor, let somebody go ahead in the grocery store or pay for somebody's coffee unexpectedly. And that requires truly being fearless. And what a time. Here we are still in COVID and a holiday season. I think the idea of an assignment for the song of this week, it's simple and it's real. It works. Thank you.
I feel like Mission Impossible. Should you accept this assignment? Everybody remember that? Well, it'll be interesting to see if anybody takes it up, and maybe we'll give a chance to people to report next week if they took the assignment and committed some act of generosity or kindness, and what happened. Who's got their hands raised? There's 2 participants, it says. Ooh, I can't see anybody with raised hands.
Mark.
Oh, Mark. Good.
Hi, John. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. I appreciate it. I really don't know too much what to talk about today, except I was just thinking of, so many times when I do something, I mean, like if I give something to somebody like who's needs money or whatever, in the street, that's kind of cool. And I don't expect anything from it. But a lot of times I think I do, like when I'm letting somebody in front of me with my car, my car issues, I expect there's this funny Seinfeld episode where he always wants the wave. I don't know if you guys ever saw that one, but if he doesn't get the wave, he's angry. But today I was in Trader Joe's and I was just thinking, I was just bringing back the cart and I cleaned it. And I wasn't really thinking, I wasn't expecting anything. And some woman looked at me and said something to me about what a nice thing that is. And I really like that, because I really didn't expect anything. And even though it's such a superficial thing, it just it felt really nice, that little silly act, just to make sure the cart was, clean for the next person that handled it. Anyway, that's all I got.
It's a lot. Thank you. Yeah. Michael.
Yeah, there were a lot of things in the reading and the talk tonight that I really enjoyed, but one thing that I found myself thinking about is the generosity of fearlessness, because of the way that he said in talking about generosity in general, that we don't give away because we're afraid we might need something or whatever. And I find myself really having to think about that and realizing that that sometimes is an obstacle for me, and that it's not miserliness in the sense of, but there is. So I actually am seeing that working with fear is really an important part of generosity practice as well.
Can you give an example?
Well, I think it's exactly that. It's always that panic of, what if, and so it takes you out of the moment and into some kind of imaginary future, and then you're not generous because you close up and you start. So I'm seeing that I need to look at a bit of a habitual pattern there. I think I think that's what I mean. And I appreciated the stories about Trungpa Rinpoche also.
Yeah.
I would tell a small story myself. It doesn't involve Trungpa Rinpoche. It actually involves his son Gesar.
Yeah.
I sometimes substitute taught there was an elementary school that was started in Boulder, Vidya. And I substitute taught there a few times, and at least a couple times, his son Gesar was there, and I think he was probably like around 4th or 5th grade. And being Trungpa Rinpoche's son, of course, I was curious to see, is he different from is there a difference from the other kids? And for the most part, I didn't see anything except for once, where lunchtime there was quite a show to watch, because everyone brought lunches from home, all the kids, and there'd be this incredible trading back and forth of, you have this, I have that, I'll give you this for that, all kinds of trading back and forth, different items for lunch, based on, and he was different in that he would ask for things if he was interested. And if somebody said no, he'd just go on to somebody else. And he would give things away if someone asked. But there was never that I'll give you this if you give me that. It was either if somebody asked him, he would usually give it, but sometimes not. And if he wanted something, he'd ask, but there wasn't any back and forth reciprocity. It was noticeably different than the other kids. That's the one thing I did see. So I thought I'd share that.
Thank you. Anybody else? If not, we can end. We'll have discussion group tomorrow. Mark, you had something else you'd like to say? Oh, you're good? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, then. Gone. So we'll have discussion group tomorrow, and let's close with the dedication of merit. I'm going to mute everybody, I guess. Yeah, we're going to do that. And then unmute. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. by the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good to
Thanks.
see
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Everybody.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you
everyone.
so much. Have a great night.
Yeah.
Great. Take care.
Bye all.
Have a good evening.
Night.
Tomorrow. Thanks.
Okay.
It was very powerful. Very powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's beautiful teachings, huh?
It's just a lot of things. Just
Yeah.
there's no words sometimes. Words just spoil it. The embellishments of something that has no way of being expressed other than being. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Peace.
Bye, George. And bye, Robert.